Hello folks, Happy here. I'm 50, living out in the wilderness where animals are my best friends. We know how to protect our pack out here. Today's story takes us to the concrete jungle of Seattle, about a fierce CEO, a broken single dad, and a love that survived tech wars and ruthless kidnappers. Where in the world are you listening to this wild tale from? Drop a comment below, and don't forget to hit subscribe for more campfire stories. Seattle in late autumn is less a city and more a relentless state of precipitation. The rain did not fall, it materialized in heavy, gray sheets, turning the neon signs of downtown into bleeding streaks of red and blue across the flooded asphalt. The gridlock was absolute. From my seat near the rear doors of the Metro Transit Route 43, I, Wilder, a quiet observer of the urban theater, watched the evening commute grind to a miserable halt. It was the kind of weather that stripped people of their pretenses, leaving only their exhaustion. Through the hiss of the pneumatic doors, she boarded. Eleanor Vance did not look like a woman who belonged on public transit. She was 32, but she carried the absolute, unyielding authority of someone much older. She was the CEO of Zenith Dynamics, though I wouldn't know that until the pieces fell into place later. Her posture was perfectly rigid, encased in a tailored charcoal trench coat that repelled the water as efficiently as she seemed to repel the world's trivialities. Her face was striking sharp cheekbones and eyes the color of winter ice, but it was her demeanor that demanded attention. Eleanor had built her software empire in a ruthlessly male-dominated industry, a crucible that had forged her into a woman who viewed vulnerability as a liability. Yet, beneath the icy pragmatism, there was a quiet, fiercely guarded warmth. Tonight, however, she was simply a brilliant executive whose state-of-the-art Tesla had suffered a catastrophic engine failure blocks away from a life-altering contract signing. Forced into the indignity of the bus, she took the empty seat across the aisle from me, radiating a furious, silent energy. A few stops later, the man boarded. If Eleanor was a study in controlled power, Liam Carter was a monument to sheer endurance. He was a tall man, though his slumped posture masked his height. He wore a faded olive canvas jacket that had seen better decades, and his dark hair was damp and unruly. But it was his face that caught my attention. Liam possessed the hollowed-out look of a man who had survived a devastation he could not quite articulate. The deep shadows beneath his eyes spoke of chronic sleeplessness, and his jaw was set with the grim determination of someone simply trying to survive until tomorrow. I would later learn that the ghost of his brilliant, tragic past and the sudden, violent loss of his wife clung to him like the damp Seattle chill, reducing a former AI prodigy to a mere data entry clerk. He collapsed into the seat directly beside Eleanor. Across from them sat an elderly woman clutching a soggy, wire-haired terrier mix named Barnaby. Barnaby, roughly 10 years old, with a graying muzzle and the distinct aroma of wet wool, gave a low, sympathetic huff. The dog possessed a stoic, comforting presence, looking at Liam with the soulful intuition only animals seem to have. The bus lurched forward, fighting the stop-and-go traffic of the choked arteries of the city. Liam tried to stay awake. I watched his head bob once, twice. He was fighting a war against his own biology, and it was a war he was losing. Somewhere near Pike Street, the bus braked harshly. Liam did not brace himself. He simply gave way. His head dropped, finding the incline of Eleanor Vance's immaculate, trench-coated shoulder. He was instantly, helplessly asleep in a way that only happens when a body has been denied rest for far too long. I waited for the explosion. I expected the CEO to shove him away, to summon her freezing authority and humiliate the stranger. She did not flinch. Eleanor Vance merely turned her head, her sharp eyes registering the intrusion. For a fraction of a second, her jaw tightened, but as she looked down at him, her gaze snagged on something. Liam's hands, calloused but with long, precise fingers, had gone slack. From his loosening grip slipped a thick stack of papers, the top pages falling open on his lap. Eleanor looked at the papers. Then she looked closer. Even from my vantage point, I could see they were not ordinary documents. They were covered in handwritten code, sprawling, elegant lines of artificial intelligence algorithms, neural network architectures sketched out in the margins with manic brilliance. Eleanor's eyes traced the logic of the code. She was a woman who read machine learning models the way other people read poetry. What she was looking at was not just competent, it was revolutionary. It was a flawless, dynamic restructuring of predictive AI logic, the exact missing puzzle piece her team at Zenith Dynamics had been failing to synthesize for months. She realized instantly that the exhausted, broken man using her as a pillow was a dormant genius. She did not wake him. She sat perfectly still, letting him rest, her mind racing through the implications of the algorithms resting on his lap. While the bus crawled through the Seattle downpour, a very different scene was unfolding across the city at the Zenith Dynamics headquarters. The glass and steel tower was mostly empty, save for the hum of the servers and a solitary figure in the executive security suite. Julian, the head of network security, was working in the dark. Julian was a wiry, nervous man in his late 30s, possessing the sleek but fragile energy of a cornered greyhound. He wore designer glasses and expensive suits that somehow always looked slightly too large for him. Julian was brilliant, but his brilliance was poisoned by a chronic, festering resentment. He believed Zenith owed him more than a paycheck. He felt fundamentally unappreciated by Eleanor's cold leadership style. This perceived slight had slowly twisted into greed. Right now, Julian was typing furiously, bypassing his own security protocols to clone the unfinished core files of Eleanor's flagship AI project. A secondary monitor glowed with a secure video link. On the screen was Marcus Thorne, the CEO of Apex Solutions. Thorne was in his 50s, a silver-haired shark of a man who wore his bespoke tailoring like armor. He had the kind of predatory charisma that made him dangerous, viewing business not as innovation, but as a zero-sum war. "Transfer is at 80%, Julian whispered, his eyes darting toward the glass doors of his office. "Excellent," Thorne's voice purred through the speakers, smooth and devoid of moral friction. "Have they made any progress on the neural synthesis?" "None," Julian replied, wiping a bead of sweat from his temple. "Eleanor is out of her depth. The project is dead in the water. Once you have this framework, Apex can launch first and bury her." Thorne smiled, a cold stretching of lips. "Just make sure there are no fingerprints, Julian." Back on the bus, the air brakes hissed violently as we reached a major transit hub. The jolt shattered Liam's precarious sleep. He inhaled sharply, his eyes flying open in sudden, wide-eyed terror. He realized instantly where his head had been resting and practically launched himself backward, hitting the window. I am so sorry," Liam stammered, his voice rough with fatigue. He hastily gathered his spilled papers, his cheeks burning with shame. "I completely lost myself. I didn't mean to." "I know you didn't," Eleanor said. Her voice was calm, authoritative, and surprisingly gentle. She didn't bother brushing off her shoulder. Instead, she reached into her pocket and produced a sleek, matte black business card. She extended it toward him. Liam stared at it, confused. "I saw your equations," Eleanor stated, her tone shifting to business. "The dynamic restructuring model. It's brilliant. I am Eleanor Vance. I run Zenith Dynamics, and I am currently stuck on a project that you just solved on a piece of scratch paper. I want you to come work for me. Lead the core development." Liam looked from the card to her face. For a moment, the ghost of the brilliant engineer he used to be flickered in his eyes. But just as quickly, the shadow of his grief snuffed it out. He looked at his worn watch. "No," Liam said softly, refusing to take the card. Eleanor frowned, genuinely shocked. "You haven't even heard the compensation." "It doesn't matter," Liam said, his voice dropping to a low, protective register. "I work a 9-to-5 data entry job because when the clock strikes 5, I leave. I don't take the work home. I have a 7-year-old daughter. She is my only priority. I can't be swallowed by a project again. I can't give you what you want." Before Eleanor could counter, the bus doors hissed open. Liam stood up, clutching his battered briefcase and his brilliant, useless algorithms to his chest. "Have a good night, Miss Vance. And again." "I'm sorry," he murmured. He stepped off the bus into the freezing Seattle rain, disappearing into the dark, leaving a billionaire CEO holding a business card in the empty air, her mind already turning over a problem she absolutely refused to let go. Chapter 2. Dust over the past and the flexible contract. Eleanor Vance did not let Anomaly slip away. By 8 a.m. the following morning, she was standing in her penthouse office, staring out at the rain-slicked Seattle skyline. She pressed the intercom and summoned her executive assistant, Chloe. Chloe was a 26-year-old force of nature, possessing a shock of tightly pinned auburn hair, a wardrobe of impeccably tailored blazers, and a hyper-efficient personality that bordered on clairvoyance. Having grown up in a chaotic household with 5 boisterous siblings, Chloe had been forged into a woman who controlled her professional environment with absolute, unwavering precision. "Find everything you can on a man named Liam Carter," Eleanor ordered, pointing to the handwritten algorithms she had transcribed from memory and laid onto her glass desk. "He currently works a low-level data entry job, but his background is high-level artificial intelligence. Find the gap." It took Chloe less than 3 hours to unearth the heavy ghosts of Liam's past. When she returned to the office, her usually sharp and impassive expression had softened into something closely resembling pity. She handed Eleanor a thin, confidential dossier. Liam Carter had not just been a competent engineer, he was once hailed as one of Silicon Valley's most promising AI architects. But 3 years ago, a brutal, senseless tragedy had severed his career. Liam had been a chronic workaholic, practically living in his laboratory. On the night of a freak, blinding snowstorm, his wife, Sarah, a gentle, devoted woman with a warm spirit who constantly worried about his health, had decided to drive to his office to bring him a hot dinner. Her car had skidded on a patch of black ice and plunged off a steep ravine. She died instantly. The guilt had entirely shattered Liam. He resigned the very next morning, packed up his life, and swore off the demanding tech industry entirely. He took a mundane, strictly 9-to-5 job just to ensure he would never, ever miss another dinner with his daughter, Mia. Reading the report, Eleanor felt a tight, unfamiliar knot form in her chest. The icy pragmatism she usually wore as a CEO melted into a profound, aching understanding of the broken man she had met on the bus. That afternoon, Eleanor drove her backup vehicle to a quiet, modest suburb on the misty edge of the city. The house was small, flanked by slightly overgrown hydrangeas and a faded wooden porch. When Liam opened the door, he froze, looking utterly baffled to see the CEO of Zenith Dynamics standing on his welcome mat in a designer trench coat. Before he could politely turn her away, Eleanor's gaze drifted past him into the cozy living room. Sitting on a faded woven rug was Mia. The 7-year-old girl was small for her age, possessing her father's dark, unruly hair, but her delicate, pale features clearly belonged to the mother she had tragically lost. There was a profound, quiet sadness in her large brown eyes, a heavy stillness that no child should ever have to carry. Beside her lay Cheddar, a 5-year-old orange tabby cat missing a small V-shaped chunk from his left ear. Cheddar was fiercely affectionate, but famously lazy, currently draped over a velvet cushion like a spilled puddle of marmalade, occasionally twitching his tail as Mia let out a highly frustrated sigh. The little girl was struggling with a tangle of colorful wires and a small plastic chassis, a robotic rover for her school's upcoming science fair. The circuit wouldn't close, and the robot lay lifeless on the carpet. Eleanor didn't wait for an invitation from Liam. She slipped off her expensive heels, walked straight past the bewildered father, and sank gracefully onto the floor right beside Mia. Eleanor was a ruthless executive now, but she had started her journey as a brilliant hardware engineer, a woman who spoke the innate language of soldering irons and copper wire. "The grounding wire is crossed with the power lead," Eleanor said softly, rolling up the sleeves of her silk blouse. She gently took the small screwdriver from Mia's hesitating hand. "Let's reroute this together, okay?" For the next 20 minutes, Eleanor patiently guided the little girl's hands, explaining the invisible flow of electricity in simple, almost magical terms. When Mia finally flipped the tiny switch, the little rover whirred to life, its LED eyes blinking brightly as it rolled across the rug. For the first time in a very long time, a brilliant, unrestrained smile broke across Mia's face. It was a radiant, beautiful expression that made the whole room feel instantly warmer. Liam stood in the doorway, absolutely breathless, watching his deeply introverted daughter laugh with a total stranger. Eleanor stood up, brushing a stray cat hair from her skirt, and finally turned to face Liam. "I know why you left Silicon Valley, Liam, and I am not asking you to ever go back to that kind of life." She pulled a customized contract from her leather folio and laid it gently on the coffee table. "This is a bespoke agreement. You will be my lead architect, but you will work entirely from this house. You set your own hours. You set your own deadlines. Your absolute, non-negotiable priority is Mia. If she has a school play, the project waits. If you need to make her dinner, the company servers wait. I need your brilliant mind, Liam. I am not trying to buy your life." Liam looked down at the contract, and then at the bright, joyful smile on his daughter's face as she chased her little robot around the newly awakened orange cat. The massive defensive wall he had built around himself for 3 agonizing years finally cracked. He walked over, picked up a pen, and signed his name without another word. "I need to configure a secure pipeline if I'm working from home," Liam murmured, the old, familiar spark of genius suddenly reigniting in his dark eyes. He pulled his bulky, outdated laptop from a side drawer and began typing with blistering, rhythmic speed, injecting a complex, military-grade, 2-factor authentication layer directly into Zenith's core network to establish his remote workspace. Meanwhile, miles away in the sterile, neon-lit glow of the Zenith Dynamics server room, Julian was smiling. The head of network security had waited patiently for the executive floor to empty out. He was ready to finish downloading the rest of the AI framework for his secret buyer, Marcus Thorne. He brought up the command prompt, his thin fingers dancing across the mechanical keyboard, ready to initiate the final extraction sequence. Suddenly, his screen flashed violently red. A massive, impenetrable cryptographic wall slammed down across the entire network architecture. Julian frantically typed his administrative override commands, his heart pounding in his throat, but his access was instantly revoked. The system demanded a remote, deeply encrypted 2-factor authentication key, a ghost protocol that hadn't been there an hour ago. Julian stared at the blinking red "Access Denied" warning, his face twisting into a mask of pure, venomous rage. Someone had just locked him out of his own domain, and he had no idea who had the power to do it. Chapter 3. The Quantum Leap and the Multiplying Traps. 60 days was all it took for a dormant genius to reshape the future of Zenith Dynamics. Over the course of 2 months, the biting Seattle autumn surrendered to a freezing, frost-bitten winter. But inside Liam Carter's modest suburban home, a profound warmth had taken root. The colossal, tangled mess of Zenith's flagship artificial intelligence project had not just been untangled, it had been fundamentally rewritten. Liam's mind, awakened from its 3-year hibernation, moved at a staggering, almost terrifying velocity. The predictive neural network was now operating at 95% completion, a quantum leap that was sending quiet shockwaves through the tech industry. To facilitate this blistering pace, Eleanor Vance had made a habit of bringing her work to Liam's living room. What began as brief, sterile status updates had organically evolved into something vastly different. The imposing, untouchable CEO of Zenith Dynamics was currently standing in Liam's small kitchen, wearing a pristine white cashmere sweater that was hopelessly dusted with all-purpose flour. She was attempting, with fierce executive determination and minimal practical skill, to bake chocolate chip cookies. Beside her, standing on a wooden step stool, was little Mia. The 7-year-old was giggling uncontrollably as Eleanor fiercely debated the structural integrity of the cookie dough. Mia had blossomed in the past 2 months. The heavy, tragic shadow that had veiled her eyes was slowly evaporating, replaced by the bright, curious spark of a child who finally felt safe. Cheddar, the lazy orange tabby, was purring loudly atop the refrigerator, surveying the domestic chaos with approving indifference. Sitting at the dining table just a few feet away, surrounded by glowing monitors and mountains of code, Liam paused his typing. He watched Eleanor playfully dab a spot of flour onto Mia's nose. The billionaire executive's icy exterior had entirely melted within these walls, revealing a woman capable of immense, nurturing tenderness. As Liam listened to the harmonizing sound of Eleanor and his daughter laughing, a sudden, profound realization hit him with the force of a physical blow. His heart, a barren and scarred landscape since the night the snowstorm took his wife, was beating with a frantic, undeniable rhythm. He was falling in love with Eleanor Vance. Yet, hovering just above this fragile, newfound happiness was an oppressive, mounting pressure. The closer the AI project came to launch, the more the industry vultures circled, and the stakes of failure grew exponentially. That immense pressure was felt most acutely by those who were failing in the dark. Deep within the sterile, glass-walled confines of Zenith Dynamics headquarters, Julian was spiraling into a state of manic paranoia. The head of network security had spent 8 agonizing weeks trying to bypass the ghost protocol that locked him out of the project's core. It was a digital fortress, adapting and shifting its encryption keys every millisecond. Julian knew that whoever was writing this code was not on the Zenith payroll, or at least, not in the building. Desperation makes a man observant. Julian noticed that Eleanor's calendar was perpetually blocked out from 4 p.m. onwards, a highly uncharacteristic schedule for the workaholic CEO. Her newly repaired Tesla Model S was always gone by late afternoon. Driven by a toxic cocktail of fear and greed, Julian slipped into the executive underground parking garage during a chaotic shift change. Sweating profusely in his tailored suit, he knelt beside Eleanor's sleek vehicle and attached a military-grade, magnetic GPS micro-tracker to the inner wheel well. The following evening, Julian sat in his unmarked sedan, parked 2 blocks down from a quiet suburban house. The rain drummed relentlessly against his windshield. On his encrypted tablet, the GPS beacon pulsed red, pinpointing Eleanor's car parked in the driveway. Julian aimed a high-powered telephoto lens through his slightly lowered window, capturing a series of crisp, digital photographs through the glowing living room window. He zoomed in, his breath catching in his throat. He recognized the man sitting at the computer instantly. Liam Carter, the fallen Silicon Valley titan. Julian's heart hammered against his ribs. He finally understood why the firewall was impenetrable. It was built by a legend. Armed with this critical intelligence, Julian did not return to the office. He drove straight to the towering, monolithic headquarters of Apex Solutions to meet Marcus Thorne in person. Marcus's private office was a vast expanse of black marble and floor-to-ceiling glass, resembling the lair of a highly sophisticated predator. Marcus himself was an imposing figure in his late 50s, possessing broad shoulders, slick-back silver hair, and eyes that held the cold, unblinking calculation of a great white shark. He wore a bespoke midnight blue suit and sipped single-malt scotch, radiating an aura of absolute, ruthless authority. Marcus was a man who viewed human empathy not as a virtue, but as a terminal disease. Standing silently in the corner of the office was a new figure, Silas. Silas was Marcus's head of acquisitions and security, a hulking, brutally muscular man with a thick neck, a flattened nose from years of bare-knuckle fighting, and dead, emotionless eyes. Silas was the blunt instrument Marcus used when corporate espionage required physical violence. Julian tossed the dossier of photographs onto Marcus's sprawling desk, his hands shaking slightly. "It's Liam Carter," Julian explained, his voice tight with anxiety. "Vance found him. He's the one writing the neural synthesis. He's doing it off-site, on a localized, closed-loop network. The firewall he built is an absolute zero-day fortress. I can't hack it, Mr. Thorne. No one can. It's mathematically impossible to break in before their launch next week." Marcus picked up the photographs. He slowly shuffled through the images of Liam coding, Eleanor smiling, and finally, a clear, zoomed-in shot of 7-year-old Mia holding her robotic rover. Marcus's thumb gently traced the image of the little girl's face. He didn't look angry. In fact, a slow, chilling smile spread across his sharp features. He took a slow sip of his scotch, the ice clinking softly against the crystal glass. "You are thinking like a technician, Julian," Marcus purred, his voice smooth and deadly. "If you encounter an impenetrable vault, you do not waste your time trying to pick the lock. You simply find the man who holds the key, and you apply pressure until he opens it for you." Marcus tossed the photograph of Mia across the desk. It slid to a halt, right in front of the hulking enforcer, Silas. Silas looked down at the picture of the smiling child, his dead eyes registering absolutely no emotion. "The digital firewall might be unhackable," Marcus whispered, turning to look out at the dark, sprawling city below. "But flesh and blood are wonderfully fragile. Silas, gather your team. We are going to attack the one vulnerability Mr. Carter cannot patch." Chapter 4. The Dark Knight and the Devil's Bargain. The Zenith Dynamics Neural Synthesis Project had reached 99% completion. The Global Press Conference, a highly anticipated event slated to reshape the entire landscape of artificial intelligence, was exactly 48 hours away. Inside his suburban home, Liam Carter stared at the glowing green compilation bar on his monitor. The impossible had been achieved. Yet, the profound sense of triumph he should have felt was entirely absent, replaced instead by a sudden, creeping unease. It was 3:45 p.m. The neighborhood school bus always dropped Mia off at the corner at 3:30 p.m., where she would walk the remaining 50 yards under the watchful eye of Mrs. Higgins. Mrs. Higgins was a plump, 60-something widow with a perpetually cheerful demeanor, a brightly knit yellow cardigan, and a fierce dedication to her unofficial role as the neighborhood crossing guard. She knew every child by name and always carried a pocket full of butterscotch candies. When Liam's phone buzzed on the desk, shattering the quiet hum of the computer servers, The caller ID flashed Mrs. Higgins's name. Liam answered with a small smile, expecting to hear that Mia had stopped to pet a stray cat. Instead, he heard the sound of a woman hyperventilating. Liam, Mrs. Higgins gasped, her voice trembling so violently it was barely intelligible. Liam, oh God. A van. A black van with no license plates. It pulled up just as she stepped off the curb. 2 men in masks. They grabbed her. Liam! They threw her inside. I tried to run. I tried to hit the window with my umbrella, but they sped off. They took Mia. The world around Liam instantly dissolved into a deafening, ringing vacuum. The floor seemed to vanish beneath his feet. Before the visceral horror could fully paralyze him, his phone beeped, signaling an incoming call from an unknown number. He blindly tapped the screen, dropping Mrs. Higgins's call. Listen very carefully, Mr. Carter. A voice rasped through the speaker. It was Silas. The hulking enforcer's tone was entirely devoid of inflection, a flat, mechanical sound that chilled Liam's blood hotter than any enraged scream could. We have your daughter. She is currently unharmed. If you wish for her to remain that way, you will take the master physical hard drive containing the complete Zenith source code and bring it to Pier 47, Warehouse B, at the abandoned shipping docks. You have exactly 40 minutes. If you call the police, if you contact Eleanor Vance, or if you attempt to upload a decoy file, I will break the little girl's neck. Do we understand each other? Liam's vocal cords seized. He looked at the framed photograph of Sarah and Mia on his desk. The agonizing, suffocating ghost of his past roared back to life, the sheer terror of losing the only piece of his heart he had left. I understand. Liam choked out, tears of absolute panic blurring his vision. Please, don't hurt her. I'm bringing it. He violently yanked the primary external solid-state drive from its port, shoved it into his jacket pocket, and sprinted out the front door into the freezing Seattle dusk, a man driven entirely by madness and despair. Miles away, the atmosphere inside the Zenith Dynamics headquarters was electric with pre-launch anticipation. Eleanor Vance was in her penthouse office, reviewing the final press releases. However, the serene corporate environment was abruptly shattered when her encrypted tablet flashed a blinding, pulsing red. The AI system, the very ghost protocol Liam had meticulously woven into the company's mainframe, was screaming a critical alert. It wasn't a digital hack. It was a localized, physical intrusion alert emanating from the subterranean server room. Someone was manually attempting to sever the internal tracking and logging systems. Eleanor's eyes narrowed into dangerous slits. She hit a speed dial button, instantly summoning David. David was Zenith's head of physical security, a towering, broad-shouldered man in his late 40s who moved with the silent, lethal grace of a former Navy SEAL. He bore a pale, jagged scar across his jawline and possessed an unwavering, fiercely protective loyalty to Eleanor, who had given him a second chance at life when the military discharged him. Server room. Now, Eleanor commanded, her voice like cracking ice. Eleanor and David descended in the private elevator, stepping out into the freezing, blue-lit hum of the server farm. They moved silently between the towering racks of supercomputers until they heard the frantic clacking of a keyboard. There, bathed in the glow of an override terminal, was Julian. The head of network security was sweating profusely, his hands shaking as he desperately tried to kill the AI's physical location logs to cover his impending tracks. David lunged forward, grabbing Julian by the collar of his expensive suit and slamming him violently against the steel server rack. Julian shrieked, dropping his decryption drive. Eleanor stepped out from the shadows, her face a mask of terrifying, unbridled fury. She picked up the dropped drive, glancing at the Apex Solutions hidden directory logo flashing on the miniature screen. You spineless, pathetic parasite, Eleanor whispered, stepping so close to Julian he could feel the cold radiating from her. You sold us out to Marcus Thorne, but you can't steal the code because Liam locked you out. So, what are you trying to cover up down here, Julian? What is Marcus doing? Julian whimpered, his eyes darting frantically to David's massive fist pressing against his windpipe. I don't know, he stammered. Eleanor leaned in, her eyes burning right through him. Liam's AI is predictive, Julian. It doesn't just log data. It analyzes behavioral anomalies. You are trying to wipe the security logs, so no one can trace your communication with Marcus tonight. If you do not tell me exactly what Apex is doing to bypass the firewall right this second, David is going to break your arms, and then I am going to ruin whatever is left of your miserable life. Julian cracked. The fragile, arrogant shell of the corporate spy completely collapsed under the sheer, suffocating weight of Eleanor's wrath. They couldn't hack it. Julian sobbed, tears of terror mixing with his sweat. Thorne said they needed the physical drive. He sent Silas. They grabbed the kid. They kidnapped Carter's daughter to force a trade at the docks. Pier 47. The revelation hit Eleanor like a physical blow. The image of little Mia, the sweet, fragile girl she had baked cookies with just days ago in the hands of Marcus Thorne's violent mercenaries, made her blood run cold, followed instantly by a surge of white-hot protective adrenaline. Liam was walking blindly into a death trap. Marcus Thorne never left loose ends. Once he had the drive, he would slaughter them both. Eleanor didn't waste another second on Julian. Zip-tie him to the rack and call the FBI, she barked at David, already sprinting back toward the elevator. Have the police heavily arm a tactical unit and converge on Pier 47, Warehouse B. Silent approach, no sirens. Eleanor burst out of the corporate lobby, the freezing Seattle rain immediately soaking her clothes. She ignored the weather, throwing herself into the driver's seat of her Tesla, with her heart hammering violently against her ribs and her mind entirely focused on the man and the child who had somehow become her whole world. Eleanor slammed her foot onto the accelerator. The electric engine whined like a jet turbine as she tore out of the parking garage, rocketing straight into the black, storm-swept night toward the docks. Chapter 5. Shield of Flesh and the Unveiling of Sins. Pier 47, Warehouse B smelled of rotting kelp, salt water, and decades of decaying iron. The relentless Seattle rain drummed a deafening rhythm against the corrugated tin roof as Liam Carter stepped through the screeching metal side door. He was soaked to the bone, his chest heaving, his fingers clutching the cold metallic casing of the Zenith Master hard drive in his pocket. The cavernous interior was swallowed by shadows, illuminated only by a single, violently flickering halogen bulb suspended from a rusted crane hook. Beneath that harsh pool of light stood Silas, the hulking enforcer, his dead eyes reflecting absolutely no humanity. Beside Silas was a new figure, Kyle. Kyle was a twitchy, dangerously unpredictable mercenary with hollowed-out cheeks, erratic, dilated pupils, and a jagged, poorly healed scar slicing through his upper lip. He possessed the frantic, coiled energy of a cornered rat, his hand gripping the collar of a terrified, weeping Mia. "Daddy!" Mia screamed, her small voice echoing into the cavernous darkness, instantly tearing Liam's heart into 1,000 ragged pieces. "Let her go!" Liam demanded, his voice shaking with a potent mixture of raw terror and absolute rage. He pulled the hard drive from his soaked jacket and held it up. "I brought exactly what Thorne asked for. The complete neural synthesis source code. Leave my daughter out of this." Silas extended a massive, calloused hand. He didn't speak. Liam slowly walked forward, every instinct in his body screaming at him to attack. But he knew Kale's grip on his little girl was too tight. Liam placed the drive into Silas's palm. The enforcer immediately plugged the device into a ruggedized tactical tablet. The screen glowed green, verifying the encryption signatures and the massive file size of the Zenith AI architecture. Silas unceremoniously yanked the drive free and slipped it into his tactical vest. Then, moving with terrifying practiced casualness, Silas reached to his hip and drew a heavily suppressed matte black pistol, aiming it directly at Liam's chest. "Marcus Thorne appreciates your contribution, Mr. Carter," Silas rasped, his voice a mechanical drone. "But Apex Solutions does not leave loose ends. Kill him, Kale. Then we take the girl to the secondary location." Liam's blood turned to ice. He lunged forward, desperate to put himself between the gun and Mia, but before a single trigger could be pulled, the entire world exploded in light and sound. The massive, rusted, corrugated loading doors of the warehouse were violently obliterated. An armored FBI Bearcat assault vehicle, closely flanked by Eleanor Vance's battered, rain-streaked Tesla, smashed through the metal barricade in a shower of sparks and twisted steel. Blinding tactical floodlights washed the warehouse in a blinding white glare, followed instantly by the deafening wail of police sirens. Leading the charge was Special Agent Miller, a grizzled, 50-something FBI veteran with iron-gray hair, a thick mustache, and the immovable, stoic demeanor of a man who had spent 30 years hunting monsters. "FBI, drop your weapons. Get on the ground!" Agent Miller's voice boomed over the armored vehicle's megaphone, cutting through the chaos like thunder. Heavily armed SWAT operators swarmed out of the Bearcat, laser sights cutting through the damp warehouse air, instantly pinning Silas to the concrete. But Cale, driven completely mad by panic and amphetamines, did not surrender. Realizing the operation was dead, his frantic survival instincts took over. He needed leverage. He needed a hostage. Dropping his firearm, Cale pulled a vicious, serrated combat knife from his thigh sheath and lunged violently toward Mia, intending to drag her away by her throat. Eleanor Vance had not waited in her car. Ignoring the deafening commands of the SWAT team to stay back, she had sprinted into the warehouse the second the doors came down. She saw Cale raise the blade. She saw the terrified, frozen expression on Mia's face. In that fractured second, Eleanor was no longer a billionaire CEO. She was a fiercely protective mother facing down a nightmare. Without a single moment of hesitation, Eleanor threw her body forward, diving directly between the crazed mercenary and the little girl. Cale's downward thrust, meant for Mia, met Eleanor instead. The serrated blade tore through the thick cashmere of her coat, sinking deep into the flesh of her upper shoulder. Eleanor gasped, a sharp, breathtaking cry of agony escaping her lips as vibrant red blood instantly bloomed across her pristine white sweater. The sheer momentum of her dive knocked Mia safely out of harm's way, sending both Eleanor and the child tumbling to the cold concrete floor. Before Cale could withdraw the blade for a second strike, Agent Miller was upon him. The grizzled FBI veteran delivered a crushing blow with the stock of his rifle, shattering Cale's jaw and sending the mercenary crashing into unconsciousness. SWAT operators immediately descended, zip-tying Cale and the stoic, silent Silas. Eleanor? Liam screamed, dropping to his knees on the wet concrete. He pulled Mia into a fierce, desperate embrace with one arm, while his other hand frantically pressed against Eleanor's bleeding shoulder, trying to staunch the rapid flow of blood. Eleanor was pale, her breath coming in ragged, painful gasps. But as she looked at Mia's tear-streaked, uninjured face, a faint, defiant smile touched her lips. Liam pulled them both tightly against his chest, the tears he had held back for 3 agonizing years finally falling freely, mixing with the Seattle rain dripping from his hair. He was holding his entire world in his arms, and they had survived. Meanwhile, miles above the gritty, blood-stained docks, Marcus Thorne was experiencing his own spectacular downfall. Inside his sprawling, black marble penthouse, the CEO of Apex Solutions was pouring a celebratory glass of single malt scotch, wearing expensive silk pajamas and waiting for Silas's confirmation call. What Thorne did not know was that Liam Carter was not just an AI architect, he was a master of digital warfare. The hard drive Silas had plugged into his tablet at the warehouse was a Trojan horse. Hidden beneath the massive Zenith code files was a highly aggressive, dormant tracking malware that Liam had hard-coded weeks ago. The moment Silas had powered it on, the drive quietly established a shadow uplink, broadcasting its exact GPS coordinates and beaming Apex's proprietary network signatures directly to the FBI Cyber Division. Thorne's secure servers began screaming with intrusion alarms, but it was far too late. The heavy mahogany doors of his penthouse were suddenly breached with a deafening crash. A second FBI tactical unit flooded his luxurious living room. Thorne dropped his crystal glass, shattering it over the marble floor, as he was slammed against his panoramic windows and roughly handcuffed. The digital evidence was undeniable, linking him directly to the physical drive and the kidnapping at the docks. As the cold steel cuffs clicked tightly around Thorne's wrists, his empire crumbled into dust. Across town, in a bleak, windowless interrogation room, Julian sat shivering in his tailored suit, weeping softly into his hands, as the reality of a lengthy federal prison sentence for corporate espionage finally crushed his fragile arrogance. The devil's bargain had been paid in full, and the guilty were finally reaping exactly what they had sown. Chapter 6. Clear skies and a new family. The sterile, rhythmic beeping of a heart monitor was the first thing that pierced the heavy veil of Eleanor Vance's unconsciousness. She slowly opened her eyes, blinking against the harsh, fluorescent lights of the Seattle Memorial Hospital recovery ward. A dull, throbbing ache radiated from her left shoulder, heavily bandaged and immobilized, but the pain was instantly eclipsed by the sight waiting beside her bed. Liam Carter sat in a stiff plastic chair, his posture bent and broken by an agonizing night of sleepless terror. His face was pale, shadowed by a thick layer of stubble, and his eyes were red-rimmed from shedding tears he had held captive for 3 agonizing years. His large, calloused hand was wrapped desperately around Eleanor's uninjured one, holding onto her as if she were the only tether keeping him from drifting into the abyss. Tucked into the small space between Liam's chair and the edge of the hospital mattress was Mia. The little girl was sound asleep, her dark curls spilling over the crisp white sheets, her small hand clutching the hem of Eleanor's hospital gown. As Eleanor's fingers twitched, Liam's head snapped up. His breath caught in his throat, and for a long, fragile moment, he simply stared at her, the sheer relief washing over his exhausted features like a tidal wave. "You're awake?" he whispered, his voice cracking violently. Eleanor offered a weak, tired smile, her ice-blue eyes softening into a warm, profound tenderness. "I promised Mia we would finish that robotic rover," she murmured, her voice raspy. Liam let out a breathless, broken laugh, pressing his forehead against the back of her hand. "You took a knife for her, Eleanor. You saved my entire world." He looked up, his dark eyes locking onto hers, stripping away every ounce of the defensive armor they both usually wore. "I spent 3 years convinced my heart was dead, buried in the snow. But when I saw you dive in front of that blade, I realized I couldn't lose you. I love you, Eleanor. I love you so much, it terrifies me." Eleanor felt a hot tear slip down her cheek, washing away the last remnants of the cold, untouchable CEO she had once been. She reached out, gently brushing a stray lock of hair from his forehead. "I love you too, Liam. Both of you." 6 months later, the relentless Seattle rain finally yielded to the bright, blooming warmth of spring, mirroring the monumental shift at Zenith Dynamics. The Neural Synthesis project launched globally to an unprecedented, earth-shattering success. The predictive AI architecture completely revolutionized the tech industry, catapulting Zenith into the stratosphere and solidifying Eleanor's legacy. But for Eleanor, the corporate triumph paled in comparison to the quiet, beautiful life she had built. In the lush, sun-drenched gardens of her private estate, a small, intimate wedding was taking place. There was no press, no corporate executives, only the people who mattered. David, the towering head of security, stood watch by the gates with a rare, genuine smile, while Chloe, Eleanor's hyper-efficient assistant, frantically coordinated the floral arrangements, wiping happy tears from her eyes. Eleanor wore a simple, elegant ivory gown, her scarred shoulder a badge of honor rather than a flaw, as she stood beneath an arch of white roses with Liam. When they exchanged their vows, they weren't just promising their lives to each other, they were healing each other's deepest wounds. Eleanor knelt down in the soft grass to face Mia, who was wearing a beautiful pale blue dress, and placed a delicate silver locket around the little girl's neck. Inside was a picture of the three of them. Eleanor officially embraced the role she had already earned in blood and unconditional love, becoming the mother Mia had so desperately missed. The true celebration of their newly forged family did not happen in a boardroom or a wedding venue, but 1 week later, inside the bustling, chaotic gymnasium of Oak Creek Elementary School. The annual science fair was a battlefield of papier-mâché volcanoes, potato clocks, and hyperactive 7-year-olds. Presiding over the glorious mess was Mr. Abernathy, the head science teacher. Mr. Abernathy was a delightfully eccentric man in his mid-50s, possessing a wildly unruly shock of curly gray hair, round wire-rimmed spectacles, and a brightly colored bow tie that featured the periodic table. He buzzed around the gymnasium with the frantic, joyful energy of a man who genuinely believed that every child was a nascent Einstein, offering encouraging words and scribbling furiously on his clipboard. In the center of the gymnasium stood Mia Carter, her eyes sparkling with fierce confidence. Beside her was her robotic rover, but it was no longer the fragile plastic toy that had struggled to move across Liam's living room rug. It was a marvel of miniature engineering. The hardware had been completely redesigned by Eleanor, featuring sleek, carbon fiber plating, omnidirectional titanium wheels, and a flawlessly soldered, highly efficient internal circuitry. The brain of the machine was powered by a localized, scaled-down version of Liam's revolutionary AI, allowing the rover to navigate complex obstacle courses, recognize verbal commands, and even learn from its mistakes in real time. Standing a few feet away, clutching a deeply unimpressive baking soda volcano, was Leo, a chubby, fiercely competitive 8-year-old with a bowl cut who stared at Mia's robot in absolute, defeated awe. When the judging concluded, Mr. Abernathy stepped up to the small wooden podium, tapping the microphone and causing a shrill feedback whine that silenced the gymnasium. "Ladies and gentlemen, scientists of all ages, Mr. Abernathy beamed, his eyes crinkling with absolute delight. We have seen magnificent creations today, but one project represents an extraordinary leap in applied robotics and programming. First place goes to Mia Carter. The gymnasium erupted in cheers. Liam and Eleanor, standing in the front row, clapped so hard their hands stung, their faces glowing with immense pride. Mia walked up to the podium, accepting the large gold ribbon from Mr. Abernathy. She looked out at the crowd, her gaze immediately finding the two people who had pieced her broken world back together. Mr. Abernathy gently lowered the microphone stand for her. Mia took a deep breath, her clear, sweet voice echoing through the silent room. "Thank you," she said, clutching the ribbon tightly. "I couldn't have done this alone. I want to thank my dad for giving my robot a brain to think." And she paused, looking directly at Eleanor, her smile radiating pure, unadulterated joy. "And thank you to my mom, Eleanor, for building it a strong heart to keep going. You helped me achieve my dream." The words hung in the air, beautiful and perfect. Eleanor burst into tears, dropping to her knees as Liam pulled them both into a fierce, desperate embrace right there in the middle of the gymnasium. Surrounded by the deafening applause of teachers, parents, and awestruck children, the family of three held onto each other tightly. The dark, freezing storms of their past had finally broken, leaving behind a sprawling, endless sky of clear, beautiful light. The beautiful lesson from this story is that true strength is not found in building walls around our hearts or chasing endless success. True strength is found in compassion and the courage to love again after a deep loss. In our everyday lives, we often get so busy with our own struggles that we forget the simple power of kindness. Just like letting a tired stranger rest on your shoulder, a small act of empathy can open the door to a miracle. We all have the power to be a safe harbor for someone else. If this story touched your heart, please share it with your friends and family. Leave a comment to let us know your thoughts, and subscribe to the channel so we can keep sharing these inspiring journeys with you. May God bless every single one of you watching this, and may He bring peace and healing to your family. If you believe that love can conquer the darkest storms and heal the deepest wounds, please comment Amen below.